Hi, welcome to Becky's Garden Paradise. I'm Becky and I'm here to show you the easiest salsa canning recipe out there for you to preserve your tomatoes, whether they're store-bought, homegrown, or a friend, coworker, family member shared some tomatoes with you. So one of the parts of canning that can be super time consuming is the food prep. So I've made different salsa recipes before where you spend a lot of time chopping the tomatoes and the onions and the peppers and the garlic and the cilantro, and it's time consuming even though it's pretty easy. But if you're in a hurry or you don't have a lot of produce coming in from your garden that you need to use up, I highly recommend this Mrs. Wages salsa pack. So this has all of the vegetables and seasonings in it, dehydrated onions and garlic and things like that. The only thing you have to add are the tomatoes, and the recipe calls for vinegar, but I'm going to show you what I use instead. So I'm starting off with a sink full of tomatoes, and these are from a store. So they're pretty tomatoes, but you know, whenever you buy tomatoes in the store, they pick them way too early, so they're not as pretty red, deep red and sweet as if you are working with home canned tomatoes. Another thing is that these are slicing tomatoes. You could use slicing tomatoes like this, like what you would usually slice to put on a hamburger or a sandwich, or you can use paste tomatoes like Roma tomatoes. Doesn't really matter when you're making salsa. So I have these in the sink. I've rinsed them off, but since they're commercially grown, they have that waxy coating on there. So I'm definitely gonna blanch and peel these before I use them. So stick around with me as I prepare the tomatoes for the salsa. One of the tools that I use to make it a little bit easier is I use this. I believe it's supposed to be a strawberry core, but I think I got this at Walmart. You could find it on Amazon too. And it makes it really easy to get the cores out of your tomatoes. And when I do that, I don't even really need to score it on the bottom. Like if there's a little piece from the blossom end like that, then I'll also just use this. I'll show you guys how to do it real quick. So I'm gonna try not to make a mess. It has all the little teeth on it that makes it, I'm trying not to get tomato juice on my floor, but yeah, you just go around in a circle to remove the core. See, the core's gone. That quick and easy, makes it a lot faster. Same thing on the bottom. Again, since I'm coring them like this, I don't need to score the end of the tomato before I blanch them. Scoring is just where you make a crisscross with a knife. That's the bottom. That's the top. This is ready to go in the hot boiling water. So I do the tomatoes in batches. I put several tomatoes in at a time, and then I take them out and put them in cool water. It doesn't have to be ice cold water, but if you have ice to put in the water, go ahead. I've also used the freezer ice packs that you use to like pack your lunches for the ice bath after you take the tomatoes out of the boiling water. I only keep the tomatoes in there for a few minutes. If they're ripe, you don't have to blanch them as long. The skin will come off a lot easier if they're like vine ripened, homegrown tomatoes. But since these are commercially grown tomatoes, the skin's going to be a little more stubborn. So I'll probably leave these in the water for like 3 minutes to help make sure that I can get the skin off nice and easy. Take them out, put them in the cool water, and then I'll bring you right back. Oh, hold on. Okay, so while my first batch of tomatoes is in the boiling water blanching, I'm filling up another pot that has a colander in it that I'm going to use as the cold water bath to drop them in once they come out of the hot water, and that just like stops the cooking process. You just put it in there for a couple minutes, take them out. I'll probably put them in another large bowl, and then I'll work kind of like in an assembly line. So while I have some in the hot water, I'll have some in the cold water, and then I'll be putting them into the blender, because another trick I use to save time when I'm doing salsa is instead of taking the time to hand chop all the tomatoes, I put them in the blender. I don't blend them to smithereens. I just pulse them until they're like the consistency I want for salsa. And I'm going for like the Mexican restaurant consistency. Okay. So I have cold water in there. This is nice and cold out of the sink. That water will heat up as I put batches of the tomatoes from the hot water in there. So once it heats up, then I'll just put the ice packs in there. Alright, so I wanted to take a moment to show you. This is what you're looking for when you're blanching the tomatoes. You want to see that skin split because it's going to come off real easy when it looks like that. The rest of the tomatoes I had in this first batch, their skins were still intact. So I turned the timer off, left them in there, and give them some more time until I see their skin crack like this one is. Alright, so still in the process of blanching the tomatoes, just multitasking, getting things ready while they're blanching. So I did want to let you know that I am doing a double batch of this Mrs. Wages salsa. So if you read the back, it says that you'll get about 5 pints. I can fit 10 pints in my canner. So another thing I like to do when I'm canning to help make it worth my while and get as much bang for my buck as I can is to try to do full canner loads as much as possible. So I have this, and again, I'm going to do a double batch. So I'm using double the tomatoes. I'm using 2 of these packs, and then the recipe calls for a half cup of vinegar. So if you were doing a double batch and using vinegar, then you're going to use the full cup for this recipe. So another thing that helps save time on canning days is to do as much of your prep work ahead of time as you can. I got my jars ready last night. If I were to be making a fresh salsa with all fresh peppers and onions, I would have washed and chopped those the night before. You could keep them in an airtight container overnight in the refrigerator. You could also use frozen diced onions and peppers in your salsa recipes as well. If you wanted to do that, if you had some that you prepared previously and froze, you sure can use that too to help save time. But again, I don't have to do that today because I'm using Mrs. Wages and it's all already done for me in this pack. So just want to inspire you that if canning is something that you're interested in or you already can, give you some tips, ideas to help make it even easier, more enjoyable for you. And again, if it's something that you haven't started yourself yet, I encourage you to do it. If it's something that you really want to do, you can find ways to make it fit into your busy life. I have a busy life too. I work 2 jobs. I have a son in college. I have other things going on, but if I can do it, you can do it. Alright, I just did a whole lot of talking and then I realized I hadn't been recording, so I wanted to bring you guys along so you could see how I peel and quarter the tomatoes to put them in the blender. I have a Vitamix, so it does a pretty good job, but I still want to help it out. So I'm peeling these tomatoes. If they were fresh homegrown tomatoes, honestly, I probably wouldn't even blanch and peel them. I just quarter them fresh with the skin on because you're going to blend them anyway. If I was doing diced tomatoes or something like that, I would definitely still peel them because it's not as appetizing to have the peels floating around in the jar with your tomatoes. But this Mrs. Wages recipe, I really like it. You can use it to dip, tortilla chips in to make a dip. Any canning recipe that calls for salsa, like some people put salsa in their chili or they use it to make Spanish rice. I make a cheesy beef and rice, like casserole, that I put a jar of salsa in, and it's good for that. A lot of times these days I use the cauliflower rice instead of regular rice when I make that recipe. But even though this is Mrs. Wages and I'm not chopping all fresh ingredients up, it still tastes much better in my opinion than the store-bought jarred salsa because it just seems like they put too much sugar in that. So this, you putting it in the blender like this is going to save you a lot of time from hand chopping all these tomatoes. I'm gonna put one more tomato in here, and then I'll blend this first batch. So I have to blend it in batches just like I blanched it in batches. Okay, so I'm getting ready to blend the first blender load of tomatoes. So I don't want to completely blend it. Just make it chunky. I gotta be careful with this. This one might be more blended than I want. Go and check it. Oh, it's good. There's gonna be a lot of juice in there. That's okay. Because these are slicing tomatoes, so they're more watery than. But you can see it's chunky. And that's it. If you were doing oh. Yeah, I'm sorry. If you were doing, I thought I wasn't recording for a second. If you were doing paste tomatoes like Roma tomatoes, there'd be a lot less water in there. But it's okay for what I use it for. Okay, so just to bring you back while I peel these, since I had the little glitch when I started the last time. So the tomato skins, after you blanch them and shock them, the skins should slide right off. I really don't need the paring knife to get the skin off. I could use my fingers. It just helps me grip it a little bit more. And I have a trash can right here, so I'm dropping the skin straight into the trash can. If they were homegrown, you could save the skins, you know. I don't know what they were potentially sprayed with, wherever they were grown or coated in to keep them looking fresh, keep the skins from getting little blotches and stuff. Okay. So a lot of them peel right off, but if they're not as loose as they should be, the paring knife really helps to get underneath the skin so that you can pull it off. There we go. Once I get all these tomatoes peeled, quartered, blended, I will put them in the stock pot, the same stock pot I blanched them in. I already washed it out and put it back on the stove. And so as I do each blender load, I will put that directly into the pot. And then once I get all of them done, then it's just as easy as adding the rest of your ingredients. So I'll bring you back for that part. Okay, so I'm still peeling and blending the tomatoes, but I wanted to give you a picture of the consistency that I'm working with from the blended tomatoes. Like I said, I like more of a Mexican restaurant where theirs is blended like that. So I'll show you. Alright, so this is what the tomatoes look like in the pot. I just turned the heat on, and there's, like, if I find a bigger chunk like that, then I just honestly use my spoon to cut it up, because we have to heat this up. You can see it's chunky. I did start draining some of the tomato juice out of it as I blend it, because there's so much water. Some of this water, or well, you know, it's the juice from the tomatoes. You need some of that, and some of it will evaporate as we heat it up too, because we gotta add the seasoning packets, the Mrs. Wage's seasoning packets to this, and bring it up to a boil and then simmer it for 10 minutes, stirring it occasionally, as well as what the recipe calls for is vinegar, but what I actually use in my salsa is lime juice. So if you check on the internet, you can use lime juice in place of the vinegar, and I think that the lime juice actually is a little bit more acidic than the vinegar is, if I'm not mistaken, from what I remember looking up whenever I researched it, because lime juice is going to give it more of an authentic flavor as opposed to the vinegar. which if all you have is vinegar, you want to use the vinegar, feel safer using the vinegar by all means. So I have the water bath canner heating up right here, and it was actually already boiling, which is way too soon because I'm not ready for it yet, but I want it to be hot and ready when I am ready to put the jars in. So I have the tomatoes over here, and I wanted to go ahead and add the Mrs. Wages packs so that those dehydrated vegetables in the packs could go ahead and start rehydrating, because it's not going to take me too much longer to blend up the rest of the tomatoes. So there's one pack. You need to save the recipe. Make sure you don't throw this away. I have 2 packs, so I'll keep one just as a reference in case I need to double check. So cut it open, and I want to show you what it looks like inside. You can see all kinds of dehydrated, dehydrated vegetables, cilantro, onions, seasonings. Smells really good. I'm just going to go ahead and sprinkle that in. You should be able to find these at stores for under $5. I usually get mine at Walmart. You can get them online. They're probably more expensive if you get them on Amazon. They do have a spicy salsa mix, and that one is really spicy, and I like spicy stuff. So if you get the spicy, make sure you really like spicy salsa. Alright, here we go. Pack number 2. Since we're doing our double batch, to get a full canner load. So whenever they tell you that this recipe makes, you know, like this one says 5 pints, that's an estimate. Sometimes you go a little less. Sometimes you might only end up with 4 pints, or you might end up with a little more, 6 pints. It depends on your ingredients. But I always want to be on the safe side, because if I did have more than 10 pints worth of salsa, then I could definitely just stick that in the refrigerator and use it this week. Okay. So, I put the packs in. I'm going to show you what it looks like as I mix it in. Alright, so that's the 2 packs of Miss Wages. I do have it, the burner on medium, just so it can start heating up. So that extra tomato juice, well, it's not extra, it's the tomato juice that came out of the tomatoes. That's going to help hydrate those dehydrated veggies, so that'll help reduce the amount of tomato juice that's in this. And then also just the process of evaporation while it's heating up. You don't have to add any other spices, salt, nothing else. That's what makes Mrs. Wages super easy and convenient. I'm not endorsed by Miss Wages. If Mrs. Wages wanted to sponsor me, I would definitely take them up, because I also love their dill, their kosher dill pickle mix is my favorite. Comes out better than the recipes in the canning books, in my opinion. It gives it a strong dill taste. Look at that big giant tomato. That's why it's important to mix it up. So this one I'm actually going to put back in the blender. That I would like, yeah, I want that to, those 2 I'm going to fish out and put back in the blender so I can blend them up a little bit more. Or I could just use the spoon to, yeah, it needs to go in the blender. Okay, so I have almost the rest, like all of the rest of the tomatoes in the stock pot with the Mrs. Wages salsa mix. And it's been heating up, so it's time to add the lime juice. You have to use bottled lime juice, bottled lemon juice when you use citrus juice in canning. So following the recipe, and that's because it has a consistent pH. If you juice fresh, some are going to be more acidic than others. That's why they say you have to use it. And for safe canning, unless you have a pH reader, it needs to be 5% acidity. So again, I'm doing a double batch, so I'm measuring out 1 cup. So I like the taste of lime juice in my salsa better than vinegar. I've seen some people use lemon juice. instead of vinegar. I'm going to put it down on the counter just to try to make sure that it's 1 level cup to make sure I have enough. Bouncy, bouncy. I'm going to add a couple more splashes just for good measure. And just to give you guys time perspective, right now it's 12:46, and I've been working on this salsa adventure for about 2 hours, but that would have taken even longer had I needed to chop up the onions and the peppers and the cilantro and all that stuff and wash everything. So I'm going to add my 1 cup of lime juice to the stock pot. There is a lot of juice, a lot of like water, juice, whatever you want to call it, that came out of the tomatoes in this. But that's okay. That's to be expected when you're using the slicing tomatoes because they have a lot more water. If you use the slicing tomatoes, but it's, like I said, it's alright when you mix it up. It looks just fine. Give it a good stir. Stir it every so often. Like since I've been like heating it up as I add the tomatoes, I make sure I stir it at least every time I add the tomatoes. Added the lime juice. I'm giving it a good stir. Make sure that that lime juice gets well distributed in the salsa. It already smells good. It smells like a salsa factory in here. Okay. Mix that in and beware, pardon my kitchen, because canning is messy, especially when you have a small kitchen. All the cabinet space I have is what you see behind me and on the other side of the sink. So you can see kitchen is full of canning dishes. So I wanted to also show you some, since there was so much juice coming out of those tomatoes, I started draining off the juice. Imagine if I hadn't drained this off. I'd have a heaping stock pot of salsa soup. So this is 1 quart jar of tomato juice, and that just, when I would add the tomatoes to the blender, I was draining the tomato juice that I could get out of the blender before I blended them, and then also the bowl that I had the tomatoes, the blanched tomatoes sitting in, that I was working through peeling all of them, that, bowl kept accumulating tomato juice. So I don't like to waste anything. You could use this to make Spanish rice, soup, chili, whatever your heart desires. Don't waste it. Save it so you can use it to flavor your food in the future. It's better than water that has the tomato flavor in it. And then this is the 2nd quart jar, so that's over halfway full. So that's over 6 cups of tomato juice that I strained off of the tomatoes. And I just wanted to show you, once I strained them, you could really see the chop from the blender. That's the consistency, the texture, like the size of the chunks that I like in my salsa. Alright, so I just added the last of the tomatoes. I'm going to set this back over here. And I just need to let it come to a boil and then let it simmer for 10 minutes. Again, some of that tomato juice is going to evaporate off of it. I have my canner here so that you guys can see stock pot here and the little system I use, because you got to make the space you have work. So I use the burner right in front of the stock pot. I put a plate on that burner, and then on that plate is where I ladle whatever I'm canning, broth, soup, chili, salsa, whatever it is out of the stock pot. It's easy for me to label each jar. Like I said, I put a plate that fits like perfect right on top of that burner to protect the burner, and then I funnel it in right there, wipe the rim, put the lid on, and put it straight into the canner that's right next to it. So let me show you guys. I have these plates. That fits perfect right on top of the burner. And then I get my canning funnel, which I already have out. My lids are ready. My jars are ready. And I'll just, like I said, get all the canning stuff cleaned up in the sink while the salsa simmers. And then, hang on just a second. And then that'll clear room for the canning jars over here. And then once I get them in the canner, it's only going to take 10 minutes once the canner comes to a rolling boil. So I'm excited to show you guys. Stick around so you can see what it looks like when it's all done. Alright, so I wanted to show you my system that I use. So I can fit 2 pint jars on this plate right here directly in front of the pot. So I'm scooping it through the funnel directly into the jar. And then I have a chopstick to go swirl around in the jar to make sure that there aren't any air bubbles. There can be air bubbles in salsa even though there's lots of liquid. So I've had it before. Alright, and then you can use paper towel, napkin, clean rag, and dip it into the I like to use the hot canning water. And then go around the rim to make sure that the rim is clean. And then I grab a lid. And for water bath canning, I'm not too picky about the lids. These are Golden Harvest lids. When I'm water bath canning, I don't mind using the cheaper lids. I've even used Dollar General lids before. Make sure that the lid is fingertip tight. And then these are hot, so watch your fingers. Use the canning lifter, the jar lifter, to place them in the hot water in your water bath canner. And you'll usually see little bubbles start to come out of the jars as you're getting your jars loaded. So hopefully you guys can see. My cameraman is occupied working on an essay for school. He said it's on the TikTok band. So I told him I want to learn. Hopefully he shares what he's learning as he's typing that essay with me. I'm interested. I don't think you ever stop learning. Consider myself a lifelong learner. There's always new things you can learn to do. I didn't know how to can. I didn't grow up with a family that ever canned. Even though my dad did like to garden. My mom barely cooked, let alone can. But as I got more and more interested in gardening, then I became more interested in canning, because if you have an abundance, then you need to know how to preserve your produce. So I started watching YouTube videos about canning, bought some canning books, bought a water bath canner. I started off water bath canning jam and pickles and salsa and diced tomatoes, things like that. And then when I started having a super successful green bean harvest, I got tired of eating green beans that summer real quick, even though I love green beans. I decided it was time for me to get the bravery to try pressure canning, and so I got the cheapo Presto pressure canner, and I love it. I actually use the pressure canner more often than I do the water bath canner now. Let me just make sure. I'm going to wipe until it's clean. You might need to wipe more than once. Again, fingertip tight. Use the jar lifter. This is my 3rd jar going in. My goal is to have 10 jars, 10 pints. And that'll be a canner full. Alright. And then I go on and do the next one. And I'm going to do all of them like this. So I'm using a slotted spoon. So there's still liquid, plenty of liquid in this salsa, even using the slotted spoon. If I have any liquid or salsa left, then I will save it and use it. I don't have enough to do like a canner load of tomato juice, but I will definitely put it in the refrigerator and use it this week in my cooking. You could use it in taco soup, all kinds of things. Possibilities are endless. This one I could add a little bit more to, because the headspace for the salsa is a 1/2 inch. So the 1/2 inch mark is the middle line on your canning jar. That's a 1/2 inch. No, yeah, the middle line. Because the line here, the first rim, line on the rim is 1 inch. So in the middle, that's the 1/2 inch. And then where it's up close to the top, that's the 1/4 inch. That's what you use for like jam and jelly. I'm going to add a tiny bit more, not that much. And if you add too much, then just use a spoon and scoop it out. So I already had to do that once. That's fine. A lot of times when you do your swirl with the chopstick, when you debubble, the level might go down if there, is air in there. It looks so good. I tell you what, it looks real good. It's hot, so be careful, but I'm going to show you guys. Looks real good. The camera doesn't do it justice, and it's so burning hot. Be careful. I have to touch hot plates at my second job, so. Or if you have experience flipping a lot of tortillas with your hands, you might have a little bit more of a heat tolerance. All right, put the lid on. Put the ring on. Make sure the lid is centered. I hold it down with my fingertips and then twirl the canning ring. Make sure it's fingertip tight. Whew, it's hot, 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 hot. Okay. I can handle a little bit of hot, but not for that long. I think some of the people I work with, especially the cooks, have Teflon hands. But I don't, because they touch those super hot plates coming out of the kitchen. I'm a server at my second job. I have to use a towel or a napkin, like a cloth napkin, to hold those hot behind plates. Just to grab them when I have to run them out. All right. See how much we get. Our goal is 10. This will be plenty of salsa to last me for a while. But if I were to get blessed with some more tomatoes or have an abundance of tomatoes from the garden, I would definitely do more salsa if I couldn't think of anything else to do. I also wouldn't mind, this is too full, we're going to take some out. So I have my spoon over here for this purpose. So I got this jar too full. I'm just going to try to carefully scoop a couple spoons out. I think one is good, yeah, just one spoonful. And it's back down to a 1/2 inch. When you can enough, you pretty much can eyeball the measurements. Okay, that's clean. Get my ring, grab my lid. And if you have jars that you open, so say that you open one of these jars, I know you guys can't see me, I'm headless right now, but if you open one of these jars and you don't use it all, say you just use like a portion of it to put on some tacos or something, you can keep it in the refrigerator. Ooh, that lid is questionable. We'll see. Or if any of them, if I ever get any that don't seal, which is, every once in a while I have that, then you can just, once they cool, put them in the refrigerator. But what I was going to tell you guys is, if you have mayonnaise jars or peanut butter jars, you can save the lids from those and use those to put on your jars, your regular mouth jars that you keep in the refrigerator. Like with the tomato juice, I'm just going to put that in the refrigerator with plastic lids instead of using your good canning lids. So far I have 2, 4, 5, so I'm halfway there, and I'm going to continue to fill the rest of the jars, and I'll show you once I get the canner loaded. Alright, so I reached my goal, 10 pints of salsa in the canner. You see the little bubbles coming out of the canner, that's the air being pushed out of the jars. So, once it comes to a rolling boil, they need to process for 10 minutes. And I still have some left in here that I'm going to jar up. And you can see some of it stuck to the bottom. Alright, so here we go. Let me put the lid on so I can get it up to a rolling boil. Alright, so the salsa has processed for 10 minutes. After the 10-minute timer went off, then I took the lid off and turned the heat off and set the timer for another 5 minutes. That timer has went off. So now it is time to remove the jars from the canner. They are still super hot. So here we go. I had almost an 11th pint left over. I took it out and let it cool and then put it in the refrigerator. Oop. So you see that water on the top? It'll be all right. We'll get that off. I just let it drip a little bit. If I wasn't holding the camera with my hand, then I'd hold another towel under the jar so I don't drip all over the floor, but it's okay. So I'm just going to carefully take it over here. I put a towel down on my counter to protect the counter from the hot jars. Now, as I was loading them, I could see or filling the jars, I could see that those dehydrated veggies had hydrated. You could see the herbs, you could see the onions, you could smell the cumin. And I put them over here, and you got to let them sit for at least 12 hours, 12 to 24. So it's a little bit after 2 o'clock, and remember I started this adventure between 10:30 and 11, so it took most of my day, and I do have to go to my second job in a couple hours. So I'll leave them here until tomorrow when I get home from work. Tomorrow's Monday. And then I'll be able to clean them off. After I clean them off, then I'll label them. Salsa 2025. And put them away. Oh, gosh. Okay, I had to make sure I was still recording because my battery's so low. Boy, that's not good. You don't want to do that. But anyway, I'm going to take the rest of the jars out. Put them on this towel, leave them here until tomorrow about this time. It'll be over 12 hours before I get home and back to them. But I wanted to show you what they look like coming out. So it's going to be some good salsa. Thank you for joining me. Please like, share, and subscribe. See you next Sunday.